Hi, my name is Amy and I work at King Arthur Flour, where I teach our Bake for Good Kids program. This is where we visit schools and teach kids the math and science of bread making. But right now, none of us are in schools. You're at home, I'm at home here in my kitchen with my daughter Grace, but it's still really fun to learn how to make bread. So we're going to teach you the Bake for Good Kids bread recipe and talk a little bit about the science that goes into bread making. All right? So we are getting ready to bake. So the first thing you do is what we are all experts at right now. You wash your hands really well. So I want you to wash your hands. If you have long hair, go ahead and pull it back. If you wear lots of things on your hands like Fitbits and rings and stuff, go ahead and take those off because you don't want them all covered with dough. And then if you like to wear an apron like I do, go ahead and put one on. Grace doesn't need to wear an apron. She's not crazy about it. She's going to be just fine. The next thing I want you to do is to get out your recipe because we want to get out all of our ingredients and all the equipment we need to make our bread. This recipe can be found on our website, King Arthur Flour Bake for Good Kids. This booklet you can download and it has a lot of great information in it, including the recipe to this bread. So one important baking tip, when you are making something from a recipe, you always want to read that recipe all the way through 2 times. So that includes the ingredients, but also all the steps that tell you what you're going to do with those ingredients. You want to read ahead because you don't want to get halfway through here and get surprised. Find out that maybe there's an ingredient you need that you don't have, maybe there's a tool you need, maybe you need to stand on your head for 10 minutes. I don't know, but you want to know, and that's why you read the recipe all the way through. Okay? The first ingredient that we're going to be working with our recipe is this. So this is yeast. And I'm going to guess that you guys already know a lot about yeast. You've probably studied this in science. So I just want you to think to yourself, what do you know about yeast? Yeast makes our dough rise. It is a single-celled organism and it's alive right now inside our packet, but it is dormant. So dormant is a great science word, and I bet you know what that means. Dormant means that this is asleep, it's at rest. We need our yeast to work because we need it to make our bread rise. So the first part of our recipe is actually about getting our yeast to wake up and to work for us. To do that, we're going to create an environment for our yeast. And in that environment, we want 3 things. We want warmth, moisture, and food. So warmth and moisture, here are 2 cups of warm water. You know it's warm and the right temperature when you put your hand in there, which is clean, and it's nice and comfortable. All right, so we're gonna go ahead and pour that in. Now we need to feed our yeast. So just like us, yeast's favorite food is sugar. So we're gonna measure 1/4 or 1/4 cup of sugar. So one thing I want you to notice is that for my sugar, we're using a dry measuring cup. So that's different from a liquid measuring cup. A liquid cup, you can measure many amounts with 1 cup. It has a spout for easy pouring. But a dry measuring cup is different. It's flat across the top and you usually measure just the 1 amount indicated. And here's why. You're gonna take your measuring cup and I want you to scoop way down deep into your sugar and I want you to put too much sugar in. You see how I've overfilled it? Then you're gonna take something flat, and I think the back of a knife works well. And you're gonna sweep off and level it off, and that's gonna give you a nice accurate measurement. All right, so we're gonna add that to the water. At this point, I want you to think about everything that's happening in your bowl as a science experiment. We're putting our ingredients together in a certain way. We're gonna test our progress as we go along, and we have a hypothesis of where we're gonna end up. Grace, do you wanna come over and help me stir? So we're gonna stir our sugar into the water, and we're gonna do that until it's just about dissolved. I'll let you take over. We know it's dissolved when you can't see it anymore and you can't hear it anymore. Now, when we are mixing our sugar into our water, or I say dissolving our sugar into our water, are we making a mixture or a solution? Do you know? Solution. Excellent, we're making a solution, that's perfect. All right, we're ready to add our yeast. I'm gonna have you keep stirring if that's okay. So here's my yeast packet. I'm gonna cut this open and just dump it in here. I can get this out of our way. So one thing that I really like about making bread is that you get to use all of your senses. So right now I can smell the yeast and it smells really good. It smells like homemade bread. So our yeast is in our warm water sugar solution. It's really happy. We can go ahead and we can add the first of our 2 flours. So I'm gonna put this here, and Grace, I'm gonna just put this over here so that you can keep stirring for me. The first flour that we're gonna add is this. This is white whole wheat flour. So this flour is a whole grain. I hope that all of you have not only heard about whole grains, but you know why you're supposed to eat whole grains. Grace, why do we eat whole grains? They're good for you, absolutely. So I'm gonna bet that a lot of you have seen wheat or a picture of wheat or wheat in the movies. It looks like a grass and has these little nubs, these little seeds on the end. Those are called wheat berries. So here's my diagram of a wheat berry. A wheat berry has 3 parts. When you're eating white flour, you're eating this white center part, and that's fine. But when you're eating a whole grain, you're gonna be eating all 3 parts of the wheat berry. And it's in those other 2 parts, the germ and the bran, that have probably over 80% of the nutritional value that wheat has to give us. So as you go through your day, if you have the chance to make, I don't know, maybe at least half of the grains you eat whole grains, it's just a healthy choice you can make for your diet. Okay. So I'm going to teach you different techniques for measuring different ingredients because right now we're going to be really precise. So flour has its own way of being measured for a King Arthur recipe. I have my measuring cup, and it's actually kind of hard to get it into the bag. So here's what I'm going to do. Take the flour, and I'm just going to pour it into something else. And at your house, this just might be an extra bowl you have. Give yourself a good, generous amount. Then you are going to do 3 things. You're going to fluff, sprinkle, and sweep. So this is what I mean. Take a spoon, a whisk, a fork, whatever you have laying around, and fluff your flour up. That means stir it until it's nice and loose. It stirs really easily. Take a spoon or a scoop, get a good amount, and I want you to sprinkle it into your measuring cup. All right, we spent all that time to get our flour fluffy. We want to keep it fluffy. Just like the sugar, overfill it, right? Make sure you've gotten all parts of that measuring cup full. Take your straight edge. Again, I'm just going to use a knife and sweep across the top. Fluff, sprinkle, and sweep, okay? So we're going to measure 3 cups. 2 are going to go in the bowl. The third one, we're going to sit out for just a moment. It is excellent if you have a baking assistant with you to stir. You can go ahead and stir that in. Thank you, Grace. All right. So here's my second cup. Beautiful. And my third cup. Nice and full. And leveling it off. Put that over there now. All right, so we've got our 2 cups in, and Grace is stirring it until it's just combined, and then we're gonna let it just kind of sit for a moment. So here's what we hope is happening inside the bowl. That yeast got into that nice warm water, is starting to come out of its dormancy, so it's starting to wake up, and then it's going to eat the sugar. Yeast is a single-celled living organism. It does not have a mouth, so how does it eat sugar? Do you know? It absorbs it through the cell wall. Perfect. So it gets that sugar and it starts to get really active. And as it gets active, it's going to start to give off a gas. But it's the same gas that you and I exhale. So we inhale oxygen and we exhale what? Carbon dioxide. Perfect.
That is what makes our bread rise.
That is exactly what makes our bread rise. So knowing that our yeast should give off carbon dioxide is great because we get to set up a test for our experiment. We want to make sure that everything is working. And if we know that it should be giving off carbon dioxide, we're going to observe something in our bowl that's evidence that that is happening. And what you're going to observe is what? Bubbles. You're going to see bubbles. So see, we have all these little tiny bubbles. That is the carbon dioxide that our yeast is giving off. That's perfect. You're definitely going to have some bubbles. If you don't have any, just stop stirring your bowl for a while, all right? You might have just been really enthusiastic and you broke some of those bubbles up. Just let it sit for a minute or 2 and you're going to be fine. So I kept out our 3rd cup of flour just so you could see the bubbles. I'm going to go ahead and add it now. And Grace, can we grab the salt and the oil, please? So these are our next 2 ingredients. We are going to add a tablespoon of salt. And in your set of measuring spoons, the tablespoon is usually the biggest one. We're going to use the same method as we did for sugar. We're going to scoop to overflowing. It's totally okay to make a mess when you're baking. All right, and level it off. And then we're gonna add 1/4 or 1/4 cup of oil. So that's a liquid. So we're using our liquid measuring cup. With our liquid measuring cup, you wanna get it on a flat surface and get kind of eye level. That's how you get a nice accurate measurement with a liquid cup. If you pour too much into your cup, don't worry, just pour it back into your bottle of oil. This oil is gonna help our bread stay soft. It's gonna keep it from drying out too fast, so it's not gonna get stale. The salt has a couple of things to do. The salt adds flavor to our bread, but salt also slows our yeast down. It kind of helps it to keep a nice steady pace as we go along. All right. At this point, I always think it looks like pancake batter. So we have our last ingredient to add. So that is this. This is your all-purpose flour, or sometimes we call it white flour. If you bake at home, this is probably the flour that you have. Remember, we're not gonna scoop it out of the bag. That's not gonna give us our accurate measurement. We're gonna pour it into our container. And then 3 steps to measuring a great cup of flour. Do you remember them? Fluff, sprinkle, and sweep. So just like before, we're gonna fluff, sprinkle, and sweep. Just like before, 3 cups. And just like before, 2 goes in and 1 stays out. Just like before, get yourself a baking assistant to stir for you. All right. Now, when we measure with a measuring cup like this, we're measuring the amount of space that our flour takes up. And we call that volume. We are measuring by volume today. Please, that would be great, Grace. Thank you so much. Now, I'm using the flour that I have at home with me right now, which is white whole wheat and all-purpose flour. You might have different flours at home, and you can use those in this recipe. It'll be fine. If you have questions while you're making this, I want you to feel free to contact King Arthur Flour. You can email us, you can chat with us. We also have a great resource called a baker's hotline, which means that you can call us and actually talk to a baker. And they're really familiar with this recipe. Lots of kids and their families call. So if you have a question, they're gonna be able to answer it for you. All right, so I totally lost track. Did I put 2 cups in? Yes. Excellent. That's why you need an assistant. Okay, so we've got our 2 cups in. I love how Grace has done this. She has stirred it until it started to come off the sides of the bowl. But you can see how it's getting really thick and sticky right now. And our spoon isn't gonna be really doing what we need anymore. So we're ready to do what is one of my favorite things. We're gonna knead the bread dough. But before we knead the bread dough, I wanna talk a little bit more about what's happening inside our bowl. So we've talked a little bit about the yeast, but now I wanna talk about gluten. Gluten is a really key part of making bread. But what is gluten? Here in our cup of flour, in wheat flour, we have many different kinds of protein. 2 of those proteins sit in our flour here, and they kind of look like tightly spiraled coils, like piles of coiled spaghetti, and they're not doing very much. But when we get them wet by adding water, and when we push them together by kneading or by mixing, those proteins stick to each other and they form gluten. And it acts like it sounds. It's this glue that holds everything together. It is very sticky and elastic. So here's why your bread is gonna rise. The yeast is giving off carbon dioxide bubbles. We saw them. The more bubbles it gives off, the more they're gonna start to try to push up. But they're not gonna escape. They're gonna get trapped in this gluten net that we're gonna make. And because the gluten is stretchy, it's going to expand and hold everything in. So that's why your bread rises. And so that's why gluten is so useful. But because it's very sticky, it can be hard to work with and it can stick to your hands. So this time we're not going to add this whole cup of flour the way we did before. We're gonna use it bit by bit just as we need it. Because if we take some flour and put it between us and the sticky dough, it kind of makes a barrier that makes it easier for you to handle. You can use your flour to clean off your spoon. You can also use flour to clean off your hands. So if you get a lot of dough on your hands, before you go to the sink, put a little flour on your hands, rub them over the trash, and you can wash your hands with flour. So we're gonna take this, I'm gonna say let's do about half. We're just gonna estimate now. I'm gonna start to do a little more estimating and not worry so much about our precise measurements anymore. I'm gonna take my spoon, whatever I have, and I'm gonna scrape everything off the sides of the bowl. I wanna make sure I get everything cleaned off. and kind of push everything that's in my bowl into a nice lump in the middle. And now we're gonna turn it out onto this surface. So I am using my King Arthur mat, which I love, but at your house, just use your kitchen counter. As long as it's clean and dry, it's gonna be perfect. I'm gonna take this, turn it away from you so it doesn't end up on your sneakers, tap it out, and you should have a mess. This is what I want you to have. See, you have bits of dough, you have flour all over. That's perfect. We're gonna get ready to knead. I'm gonna put a little bit of flour on either side because remember, that's gonna help my hands from sticking. And I'm gonna knead in 3 steps. We're gonna fold, push, and turn. Say it with me. Fold, push, and turn. So I'm putting some flour on my hands. I'm lining my dough up. I'm gonna start from the top, the furthest away from me. I'm gonna fold it towards me. Here where the dough comes together, I'm gonna take the heel of my hand. My fingers are up and out of the way, and I'm gently gonna push it forward. Take this whole thing, kind of pick it up a little bit, and turn it a quarter turn. Flour, together, fold, push, and turn. And you just keep going. If it starts to stick to you, are you gonna add a bunch of flour or a little? You're gonna add just a little, just a whisper at a time. From this point on, through kneading our dough, up through when we're shaping our dough, you wanna use the smallest amount of flour possible, just what you need to get the job done. Every once in a while, pick up your dough, move it to the side, and see all these little bits that are underneath? Scrape those away. Just sweep them out of the way. Put some fresh flour down, just that whisper, a little bit. Get your dough back together and start kneading. When I am pushing, my fingers are out of the way. I'm not squeezing my dough, all right? And that push is a gentle push. This is not your brother or sister who has gone into your room for the 500th time and you wanna get your stress out. Don't do that on your dough. Do that somewhere else. I don't wanna push so hard that I break through my dough like that. I don't wanna do that because I'm gonna see that sticky part and think I need to add a lot more flour, but you actually don't. You'd be putting too much flour into your dough. So we're just gonna focus on the outside. I want you to set the timer and I want you to knead for about 5 minutes. It's gonna seem like a long time, but you're learning a new skill. You're doing something new. So I want you to be patient and take your time. At this point in the process, it's more important to do it right than to do it fast. All right, so I'm gonna knead this for 5 minutes and I'll be right back. All right, welcome back. So I've been kneading the dough for about 5 minutes. The timer's gone off. So how do I know that my dough is ready? There's a couple of ways to tell. You can see how everything has come together. My dough has gotten smooth and bouncy. And when I go to push my dough, do you see how it all stays together, how it follows my hand? That's the gluten holding everything together. When your dough gets to about that point, I want you just to put it over to the side and we're gonna let it rest for about 5 minutes. While it's resting, it's a great time to kind of pick up everything you've been using. I'm gonna take our bowl, I put a little bit of oil in here. I'm just gonna wipe it around because our dough's gonna go back in and I don't want it to stick. All right? Through the magic of Facebook, it's been 5 minutes. I'm gonna come back to our dough and you're gonna knead it at home, maybe for about another minute or so. And you're gonna find that in that rest, your dough has gotten smooth, firm, and bouncy. And you know it's ready when you're able to put it into a ball, the sides stay up, and when you gently press against the dough, I'll use some flour so you can see. See how the dough springs back? That's perfect. So I'm gonna pick this up, take my bowl. I like to turn it upside down and just roll it a little bit. It gets a little bit of oil on the top. And now I wanna cover this so it doesn't dry out. So my bowl has a lid, so you can use a lid if you would like to do that. If not, you can also take a little piece of plastic, tuck that down around, and then cover it with a towel. You are now gonna let your dough rest for an hour and a half. You just wanna put it in a nice warm room. Does not have to be anything fancy. Set the timer, go off, go for a walk. If you've got homework or assignments from your school, check those out, do those. Do not stand next to your dough for an hour and a half. It is incredibly boring, okay? So you're just gonna put your dough to the side, and then in an hour and a half, when you come back, magically, your dough will have risen. So it should be twice the size it was than when it started. If you had a clear bowl like mine, you can kind of see some of the carbon dioxide bubbles in there. And before, where our dough had a lot of bounce, there's no bounce in our dough anymore, okay? Those things aren't bouncing back. So I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna take this out. And Grace, I'm gonna let you put this over there because we're done with this for right now. So here's our dough. Sometimes when we talk about making bread, you hear people punching their dough down. You don't need to do that. I just want you to lightly press it and deflate it. Get rid of any really big bubbles there. So here's my one recipe. With this one recipe, I can make 2 loaves, or I can make a few other things. So what I'm gonna do is take our dough, and I'm just gonna divide it in half like this. With half of this dough, I'm gonna make a braided loaf. I'm gonna show you how to make this loaf of bread. With this half of the dough, I'm gonna show you how to make 2 other things. I'm gonna show you how to make cinnamon rolls and garlic knots. So I'm gonna cut this in half, and I'm gonna give this dough to Grace. So Grace is gonna take this half of the dough, and she's gonna roll out a rectangle about the size of a piece of paper. So that's for our cinnamon rolls. I'll give that to her. And then we'll use this also to make our garlic knots. So I'll get that out of the way as well. And we'll divide that into some pieces in just a moment. All right, so we're gonna make our braid. Braiding needs 3 pieces of dough. So we're gonna take this and we're gonna estimate and use fractions because you cannot bake without using math. So I'm just estimating into thirds. I'm gonna divide this. I know that you all know how to work with Play-Doh. You did that when you were little. We're gonna do something similar. I'm gonna roll these into 3 ropes, but I'm gonna show you how a baker does it. So here's my piece of dough. I'm gonna start at any end, and I'm gonna roll it up and make it into kind of a tube. Looks almost like an egg roll. I'm gonna start in the middle with one hand, and I'm gonna press down until I get a good dent in the middle. Now I can take my 2 hands and roll out to make that rope. So it's doing that what we call pre-shaping that helps everything to roll out the way that you want to more easily. So let me show you that again. Here's my piece of dough. I roll it up. One hand in the middle. Whoops. And then 2 hands. So when I roll, my hands are wide and flat. They're not tipped. And I'm using long stretches of my hand. So I'll do that 3rd one. One thing that these would be great for, if you didn't want to make a braid, is you could make breadsticks. You could cover them with garlic butter, Parmesan cheese, Italian spices, and they would be delicious. All right, so here are my 3 pieces. I want you to notice something. See how I stretch it out and it pulls back together? That's the gluten in our dough. If your dough is fighting you a lot, like you're trying to shape it and it won't go, I want you just to cover it and let it rest for a minute or so. And that'll give the gluten a chance to relax. And when you come back to shape it, it'll be easier. All right, so but here are my 3 pieces. So I'm gonna guess that a lot of you already know how to braid, but if you don't know, I'm gonna show you. So here are my 3 pieces. I'm gonna line them up like this, and I'm gonna braid upside down so that you can see it. Here are my 3 pieces of dough. I'm gonna pinch them together at the top. I like to put 1 on one side and 2 on the other. And all you're gonna say over and over again is that you wanna go from the outside in, from the outside in. So here's my outside piece. It goes up and over, and now it's inside. Outside, up and over, inside, outside, in, and just keep going. Take your time. I like to make a braid because it's one of those things that looks really fancy, but is actually really simple to do. So if you make this, you're gonna be very impressed with how it turns out. So I've gotten to the end. My pieces aren't the same length. Don't worry, cheat. Pinch, turn those under, up here. I'm gonna pinch it and turn it under. And there's your braid. I'm gonna grab a lightly greased cookie sheet. I just put a little bit of oil on here. I'm gonna take my braid, I'm gonna lift it up, lay it on my baking sheet, and this needs to rest again for 30 minutes. So I'm gonna cover it. I'm gonna take the plastic off of our other dough. I don't want it to dry out, so I'll cover it with plastic and a towel. This now needs to sit for 30 minutes. Your yeast is still alive, it's still giving off carbon dioxide, so your dough is actually still rising. It's not going to double in size in 30 minutes, but it's going to get a little bit bigger and a little bit puffier. All right, let me put that to the side. Are we ready for cinnamon rolls? All right, I'm going to grab this piece of dough. Could you hand me the cinnamon sugar and the rolling pin, please, Grace? So here's our piece of dough. We've shaped it out to be a rectangle. You can use a rolling pin to do this. You can use your hands to tug it. If you don't have a rolling pin at home, but you have a jar of spaghetti sauce, that works just fine. We have our rectangle. We are going to cover this with filling, but we're going to leave just a little space at the end with no filling. We're going to take our cinnamon sugar and spread this around. So watch, we're going to go only up to that line and stop. Everywhere else, we're going to go right to the edges. All right? So I'm making cinnamon rolls, but you can put all kinds of things in here. You can put jam and make a jelly roll. You can put ham and cheese and make a sandwich roll. You can lay mozzarella cheese and pepperoni and you can make a pizza roll. It'd be great. So here it is. I'm going to take this. I'm just going to loosen this up at the end. I want a nice tight spiral. So I'm going to start here and watch what I do. I roll it, but I also tuck it under and kind of tug it back. So I roll it, tuck it under and tug it back, and I just keep going, taking my time. If it sticks, I can use a knife or a spatula to get underneath and loosen it up. As I get to the end, I'm just going to stretch my dough out to meet me. It doesn't have to be perfect. All right, we're going to go right to the end. Because there's no sugar here, it's going to stick together and hold together. So here are my things for cinnamon rolls. There's enough here, I think, to make 8. So once again, let's estimate and use fractions so everyone gets a roll that's the same size. Here's one piece. I'm going to eyeball it halfway, make a mark. I now have 2 pieces. I do each of those in half. I have 4. I do those in half again, and I have 8. Now, there's lots of ways that you can cut these. You can use a knife, and that would be fine. They're a little squished. My favorite thing for cutting cinnamon rolls is dental floss. Dental floss gives you healthy gums and beautiful cinnamon rolls. And if you don't have dental floss at home, go get some because you should have dental floss at home. So take your dental floss, lift this up, put underneath so you have your line. You know where you want to cut it. Loop this around once like you're tying your shoe, just like this. So hold on to these and just pull. See how easily that came out? Look at how good our swirl is. We did a good job. I'll do it one more. Loop it around once and just cut it through like that. Perfect. So I have a round pan. I'm going to hand this off to Grace, my assistant, and she's going to finish cutting those. All right. So meanwhile, over here, sorry to step off camera for just a moment, I'm grabbing some pieces of dough. So I took that other 4th and I divided it into 6 pieces. And I'm going to show you how to make a knot. All of these shapes that we're doing, you can find them in our booklet as well as some other shapes as well. And I'll show you those in just a moment. So here's my piece of dough. I'm going to roll it out just like I did the rope for our braid, only in miniature. And here's how you make a twisted knot. I'm going to hold one end. I'm going to loop it around my hand. So now I have this loop. Reach through and grab that long tail. Pull it through once. Now pull it through a second time. Pinch those together and turn it over. And there's your knot. Let's do one more. You know, I talked about making garlic knots, but these actually right now are covered in cinnamon sugar, so they could be cinnamon sugar knots as well. Here's this. Loop it around your hand. Reach through, grab that tail, pull it through once. Pull it through twice. I have my 2 ends. We'll pinch those together and turn it over, and there's my knot. All right, so when you are done with your cinnamon rolls, they're gonna look like this, which is beautiful. When you are done with your knots, they can look like this, which is also really great. So all of these shapes are in your recipe booklet. Again, your recipe, which you're going to read twice before you begin, you can download online. This booklet is really helpful. It has a lot of great information in it. It tells you the equipment you need, the ingredients you need. I have some tips on some of the techniques that we learned today. the recipe, which again you read twice. Then I have 2 pages all about shapes. So here's our 1 recipe of dough, and each shape tells you whether you need a half or a fourth of your dough. It tells you how long to bake it and what temperature to bake it at. So in addition to our braid, we also have how to make pizza, how to make crescent rolls. Here's our cinnamon rolls with the ratio, so you can make your own cinnamon sugar at home. You can make the frosting that goes on after it comes out of the oven. And here's a dinner roll, and then here's that knotted roll that I taught you. And then, because I want you to bake, because you have all this time to bake with your family, this is one of my favorite recipes for blueberry muffins. So thank you so much for spending time today. I hope that you guys are doing okay at home, and I hope that you have a great time baking. Thank you so much.